This man had no children, shouted the niece, slamming her hand on the notary's desk. The notary adjusted his glasses, looked at the yellowish paper in his hands, and replied, with the calm voice of someone who knows he is about to change the lives of everyone there. He did. Yes, madam, and his name is right here, along with your uncle's signature. A big house full of relatives dressed in black, an inheritance that seems certain, and a secret kept for 25 years, hidden beneath the red earth of a coffee farm. Does a man's forbidden love, hidden his entire life, have the right to win after death? Now leave your comment below and subscribe to the channel. And tell me one thing. Have you ever had a great love? Now come with me and I'll tell you this story. Mr. Anacleto was known throughout the region as the quietest man in the countryside. Owner of a coffee farm that stretched as far as the eye could see, he lived alone in a house far too big for one man. He never married. No woman was ever known in his life, and so, with this reputation as a reclusive bachelor, he grew old until the day his heart stopped suddenly. Under the jabaticaba tree he himself had planted when he was still a young man, the farm workers found him sitting on the wooden bench under the tree, his hat fallen beside him, his eyes closed as if he were simply resting after a long day of work. It was thus that a man who had spent his entire life hiding what he felt departed in silence, in the same way he had lived. The news spread quickly through the region. Within hours, the big house was already full of relatives whom Anacleto barely saw once a year. Donna Fermina, his only living sister, cried at the doorstep. But behind the tears, her eyes were already measuring the rooms, the furniture, the lands that stretched as far as the eye could see. Her son, Bellarmino, a man with gentle speech and a calculating gaze, was already walking around the property as if every inch belonged to him, counting the cattle in the corral, assessing the value of the barn full of freshly harvested coffee. My uncle had no children, Bellarmino would say to anyone who would listen, as he walked through the corridors of the big house, examining the old furniture. The inheritance is ours by right. Who else could inherit all this, if not us? No one contested it. After all, it was common knowledge in the region that Anacleto had lived and died alone, without a wife, without known descendants. The neighbors who came to pay their condolences repeated in low voices the same story. A good, hard-working man, but closed off like a church door on a weekday. No one knew of courtships, no one knew of loves. Just a man and his land, year after year, as if solitude were the only destiny he had chosen for himself. But there was someone who knew a secret, and that someone watched everything from a discreet corner of the room. Her name was Grandma Ritinha, the oldest woman on the farm, who'd worked for Anacleto since she was a girl and had seen him grow up, suffer, and grow old alone. She was the one who washed his clothes, cooked his meals, and had witnessed, over decades, the heavy silences of that man who carried an invisible weight on his shoulders. While the relatives discussed the division of assets in the main room, she stood still in the hallway, looking at the portrait of the master on the wall, and whispered to herself that if they knew the truth, they would not be in such a hurry, because there was, yes, a son whom Anacleto never had the courage to acknowledge before the world. Not out of shame for the boy, but because of a love that the society of that time would never allow to be recognized. Decades earlier, when he was still young and full of dreams, Anacleto had fallen in love with Benedita, an enslaved woman who worked on the same farm that had belonged to his father. She sang while working in the vegetable garden, a clear voice that seemed to cross the wind and reach wherever Anacleto was. It was thus, between the smell of wet earth and the sound of that voice, that his heart surrendered, without asking permission, without choosing the right moment. A love born in silence, nurtured in secret, between fear and tenderness. A love that, if discovered, would cost her life and his family's honor. They would meet at dusk, near the stream that cut through the property, where the trees formed a green roof that hid the two gazes that had been seeking each other for weeks. There, far from the eyes of the world, Anacleto was just a man in love, and Benet just a woman who dreamed of a different destiny from the one imposed on her at birth. Grandma Ritinha, still a girl at that time, was the one who, unintentionally, witnessed the first meetings of the two. She kept a secret her whole life, like someone guarding a precious stone inside her chest, knowing that revealing it too soon could destroy everything. When Benedita became pregnant, Anacleto felt at the same time the greatest joy and the greatest despair of his existence. He loved her. He truly loved her. But the world around him left no room for that love to exist in the open. If his father found out, or worse, if the society of the region knew, the consequences would fall on Benedita, not on him. It was out of fear of losing her in an even crueler way that Anacleto chose silence, even knowing that this silence would cost his own heart dearly. He did what he could. He secretly bought her manumission, using savings he had kept for years, and gave her a small house set apart. On the edge of the road that led to the neighboring village, he supported the sun from a distance, like someone caring for a flower he cannot pick, appearing only in short visits, always under the pretext of delivering supplies or checking on the harvest of a vegetable garden that in truth no longer needed care. The boy grew up knowing only that a godfather took care of him. He never knew that the man with sad eyes who appeared from time to time, bringing food and medicine, was, in fact, his father. Anacleto watched his son play from afar, without being able to approach as he wished, without being able to teach him to ride a horse, to recognize the stars. Things a common father would do without thinking twice. Benedita died young from a fever that the doctors in the countryside did not know how to cure. Anacleto cried alone, locked in his own room, without being able to attend the wake as a grieving man has the right to, because in the eyes of everyone he was just a charitable farmer who helped a poor family. And the boy, now a young man, was raised by a neighboring family, never imagining the truth hidden behind the discreet kindness of that solitary farmer. Anacleto never had the courage, or perhaps never had the chance, to tell the truth in life. He grew old watching his son grow from afar, get married, have his own children, without ever being able to say the words he had carried for decades. But he kept, all that time, a sealed will at the notary's office in the city, waiting for the day when the truth could finally be told without fear. And that day had arrived. The notary's office in the city was small, with peeling plaster walls and a ceiling fan that creaked non-stop, a sound that mixed with the nervous buzz of the relatives gathered that morning. There the heirs of Anacleto gathered, dressed in their best mourning clothes, anxious to hear the reading of the will. Donna Fermina sat in the first chair, the handkerchief already ready in her hands, not out of sadness, but of expectation. Beside her, Bellarmino tapped his foot on the wooden floor, impatient, checking his pocket watch every few minutes. Other more distant relatives also attended. Cousins whom Anacleto barely knew, great-nephews who had never set foot on the farm, all drawn by the expectation of a fortune they considered certain. The small room barely held so many people, and the heat of the morning combined with a general anxiety left the environment heavy. The notary, a short man with thick glasses, cleared his throat before beginning and announced that they would proceed with a reading of Anacleto Vieira dos Santos's last will and testament. An immediate silence took over the room, broken only by the constant creaking of the fan. He unfolded the yellowish paper carefully, as one handles something sacred, and began to read aloud, slowly. I, Anacleto, in full possession of my faculties, record that everything I built in life lands, cattle, house, and goods does not belong to distant nephews who barely knew my heart. It belongs to my son, fruit of the only true love I had in life, whom I never had the courage to call son before the world, but who always was and will be my greatest wealth. A heavy silence took over the room, followed by a general murmur that grew like a wave. Bellarmino jumped to his feet, his face red with anger, shouting that this was impossible, that his uncle had never married, had never had any child, and that it could only be a mistake or a scam by some opportunist trying to take advantage of the situation. Donna Fermina tried to calm her son, pulling him by the arm, but Bellarmino continued to insist that this was an injustice, that the family deserved that inheritance. After years of coexistence, even if distant, with the uncle, the notary raised his hand, asking for calm, and waited for the buzz to die down before continuing the reading. The name of my son is Deodato, raised by Zacarias and Josefina, residents of the old river road. He never knew the truth. I ask that, upon reading these words, you have the kindness to tell him what I never had the courage to say, that he was loved from the first moment by a father who feared the world more than he feared losing him. The notary paused, took off his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, and continued reading an even more personal passage. I know that this document will cause pain and outrage among those who expected this inheritance. I ask for forgiveness for that, but I cannot, even after death, deny once again the existence of the only son I fathered in this world. May the justice finally done compensate, even if late, for all the years in which I was too cowardly to act. Donna Fermina brought her hand to her mouth, incredulous, her eyes watery. Grandma Ritinha, who watched from a discreet corner, let a tear fall, not from surprise, but from relief. Finally, the truth was coming to light after so many years kept inside her chest. Meanwhile, kilometers away, a humble worker on a small plot continued his usual routine, tending to the plantation, without imagining that his life was about to change completely. He received the news through a messenger sent by the notary's office, a young man on a tired horse who delivered the sealed note and waited, curious to see the reaction of that simple man. Deodato read the note twice, not fully understanding what those formal words meant. He asked the messenger to repeat where it came from, and the young man explained that it was from the city notary's office, and that there was an inheritance matter involving the late Anacleto Vieira dos Santos. It must be a mistake, he said to his wife, Rosalina, who watched him worriedly while finishing hanging the washed clothes on the line. I never really knew that farmer. I only know that he would appear from time to time at our house when I was a boy and bring things for my mother. My mother said he was a generous godfather, but she never told more than that. Rosalina, more attentive, set the clothes aside and held her husband's hands, looking deeply into his eyes. She asked softly, what if it wasn't a mistake? What if that man, all this time, was more than a generous stranger? She reminded her husband that he himself had often commented on the sadness in that farmer's eyes, on how he seemed to want to say something, and never did. Deodato fell silent, looking toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, feeling for the first time that perhaps his entire life hid a truth he had never imagined. That night, he could barely sleep, turning over in his memory every visit from that quiet man, every gesture of care that, at the time, seemed like mere charity, and that now gained a completely new weight. The next day, he decided to answer the notary's call, even against the wishes of some neighbors who suspected traps. Rosalina insisted that he go, saying he deserved, at least, to hear the truth with his own ears, something she had kept inside him for so long without explanation. Days later, Deodato was summoned to appear at the farm to finally learn the complete truth about his origin. The trip there was long, made in a cart borrowed from a neighbor, and throughout the entire journey he turned questions over in his head, unable to organize his thoughts. Upon arribin, he was received with distrust by Anacleto's relatives, sideways glances, whispers in the corners. Bellarmino, upon seeing him get down from the cart in simple clothes and hands calloused by work, wrinkled his nose and commented, in a low but audible voice, that that man did not look like the heir to any farm. But it was Grandma Ritinha who welcomed him first, hurrying out of the big house as soon as she learned of his arrival, taking his calloused hands in hers, her eyes watery with an emotion that had been building for decades. Deodato, my son, she said, her voice choked, almost unable to finish the sentence. I knew your mother, a beautiful woman with an enormous heart, and I knew the love she and your Anacleto had hidden from the entire world, because the world would not let that love breathe. She invited him to sit in the shade of the tree where Anacleto used to rest, and there, slowly, she told him everything. Secret meetings near the stream, the constant fear of being discovered, the manumission bought in secret, the visits disguised as charity. Deodato listened in silence, his face filled with a mixture of astonishment and pain. His pieces of an entire life finally fell into place. After telling this story, Grandma Ritinha took him to the farmer's room, untouched since his death. The smell of cedar and tobacco still impregnated in the walls. She showed him a small wooden box hidden behind a wardrobe, covered by a thin layer of dust. Inside, letters never sent, a faded portrait of a woman with a sweet smile, and a note, written in trembling handwriting, dated a few months before Anaclito's death. Deodato picked up the portrait with trembling hands, recognizing there, in the facial features, something familiar. Perhaps the same eye shape he saw in the mirror every morning. He sat on the farmer's bed and began to read the note in a low voice. My son, if one day these words reach you, know that every gesture of kindness you received in silence, every medicine, every sack of flour left at your door, came from a father who did not have the courage to embrace you in the public square, but who loved you every day of his own life. Forgive my cowardice. Do not let it define who I was. I leave you not only land, but the proof that love, even hidden, never ceased to be true. The note continued. In another passage, I remember every birthday of yours that I watched from afar, hidden behind the fence, without being able to approach. I remember the first time you mounted a horse alone, and how I almost shouted with pride, "But ild buck." As I always held back, if I could go back in time, perhaps I would have had the courage to act differently. But I cannot go back. I can only, now, too late, tell the truth. Deodato read the words with a choked voice, his hands trembling as much as the handwriting of the note. Decades of unanswered questions, of a void he never knew how to name, finally made sense. He felt no anger. He felt, for the first time, that he belonged to someone, that his existence was part of a bigger story than he had imagined. Grandma Ritinha stayed by his side in silence, letting the moment unfold without haste, as one who knows that certain pains and certain joys need time to be understood. In the following days, Bellarmino, still unconvinced, tried to contest the will in court, alleging fraud and insisting that that simple man had forged the entire story to seize the lands. He hired a big city lawyer and took the case before a judge, demanding that the will be annulled, but the evidence was clear. The old payment records kept by Anaclito himself, the firm testimony of Grandma Ritinha, who recounted every detail of the story with great richness, and the letters never sent, written over decades, all in the same handwriting as the will. The judge, after carefully analyzing each document, decided that the truth, no matter how much it bothered some, could no longer be hidden or denied. Bellarmino left the courtroom defeated, unable to hide the bitterness on his face. Donna Fermina, unlike her son, sought out Deodato days later, in an unexpected gesture, and apologized for the way the family had treated him at the beginning. She sighed that, despite everything, she recognized a bit of the brother she had lost there, and that she would like, if possible, to maintain some contact in the future. Months later, Deodato took over the farm, not with the pride of wealth, but with the sweet weight of honoring the memory of a father who had loved him from afar his entire life. He brought Rosalina and the children to live in the big house, and little by little he learned to care for the land that, without knowing it, had already been part of his story since birth. He christened the Jabuticaba tree where Anaclito had died with a small wooden plaque, carved by himself on the nights he could not sleep, where he had engraved only one phrase: he arrested a man who loved in silence, but who never stopped loving. And Grandma Ritinha, now quite elderly, would sit many afternoons under that tree, beside the son who had finally found his place, telling stories about the woman with the sweet smile and the quiet farmer who had loved her more than any words could ever express. Deodato's grandchildren grew up hearing these stories, learning from an early age that true love, even when the world tries to silence it, finds a way to cross time. This story makes us think about how many true loves the world has already suffocated out of fear, out of prejudice, out of conventions that had nothing to do with what really matters. Human feeling. Anaclito was not a cowardly man. He was a man who loved within the limits imposed on him, and who, even late, found the courage to let the truth win. How many families hide similar stories? How many children grow up without knowing how much they were loved, because the love that generated them did not fit the rules of their time? And how many times does the truth, even taking decades to appear, still arrive in time to heal something? The lesson remains. True love, even kept in silence, even postponed for an entire lifetime, always finds a way to come to light, even if it is through a yellowish paper, read aloud decades later. And there also remains the reminder that the courage to tell the truth, even if late, is worth more than all the silence accumulated over the years. If this story touched your heart, leave here in the comments what you felt. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Because here, every week, there is a new story of life, love, and overcoming waiting for you.